Case 1. Brenda Andrew. The 20th of November, 2001. Oklahoma County District Court. A family. A garage. A morning that should have ended with a father picking up his children for a visit, and instead ended with a community forced to ask how well anyone truly knows the person sleeping beside them. Before we go further into what happened inside that garage in Oklahoma City, there's something worth saying plainly. Behind every file number in this story is a real family who lived through it, and a justice system that had to sort fact from fabrication in real time. That's what this channel is built to explore, not for shock, but for understanding. Rob Andrew was not expecting a fight for his life when he pulled into the garage of the home he used to share with his wife. He was expecting to load up his 2 children and take them for the holiday. Instead, in the enclosed space of that garage, he was shot. Twice. He did not survive his injuries. Brenda Andrew, his estranged wife, was also struck, a wound to her arm, and she told responding officers a story that would come to define the next 2 decades of legal battles. 2 masked men, she said, had forced their way in and opened fire. A random, senseless home invasion. That was her account. Investigators did not stay convinced for long. The marriage had been unraveling for months. Brenda was involved with a man named James Pavitt, and detectives began building a picture that looked nothing like a stranger attack. Financial records. Life insurance paperwork. A trip the 2 of them took together to Mexico shortly after Rob's death. Behavior that read, to investigators, less like grief and more like flight. Pavitt eventually broke. He admitted to being the one who pulled the trigger, alongside a friend who helped him carry out the plan. But in his account, he insisted Brenda had no part in it, that this was his doing alone. The state of Oklahoma did not accept that version either. Prosecutors argued the 2 had conspired together, that the fabricated masked men's story was Brenda's attempt to cover a crime she had helped orchestrate. In 2004, a jury convicted her of capital murder. She was sentenced to death, becoming, and remaining for more than 2 decades since, the only woman on Oklahoma's death row. Her case did not end quietly, and it hasn't ended even now. In the years since her conviction, Brenda Andrews' legal team has argued that her trial was compromised, not by the facts of the case, but by how the prosecution chose to present her as a person. Witnesses were asked, at length, about her past relationships, her clothing, her behavior as a wife and mother, in ways her attorneys say had nothing to do with proving guilt and everything to do with painting a character. In January of 2025, the United States Supreme Court agreed there was enough concern to send the case back for another look, ordering the appeals court to determine whether that kind of evidence made her trial fundamentally unfair. A year later, in January of 2026, a panel of that appeals court ruled against her, finding her trial had not crossed that line. Her attorneys have since asked for the full court to reconsider. As of today, the case remains open, and Brenda Andrew remains on death row. Whatever the ultimate outcome of those appeals, the underlying facts found by the jury stand. A husband who never made it out of his own garage, and a case that took 2 decades and multiple courts to work through. A reminder that the machinery of justice, even when it reaches a verdict, doesn't always reach a final word. If you or someone you know is navigating the fallout of domestic conflict or family violence, know that support resources exist through local family justice centers and national domestic violence hotlines. Help is always closer than it feels in the moment. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 2. Wanda Jean Allen. The 2nd of December, 1988. Oklahoma County District Court. Some of the cases that shaped Oklahoma's legal history didn't happen in a hidden location, behind closed doors, far from anyone who could help. This one happened in broad daylight, in the parking lot of the very building meant to represent public safety, the Oklahoma City Police Department. Wanda Jean Allen and Gloria Jean Leathers were partners, and like many relationships that unravel under stress, theirs had grown volatile in its final months. On this particular day, a dispute between them escalated far beyond words. In the parking lot outside the police station itself, Allen shot Leathers. Leathers survived the initial injuries for several days, but ultimately did not recover, and the case moved from an assault investigation into a homicide case. What followed was a trial that became notable for reasons far beyond the crime itself. Allen was convicted and sentenced to death, and her case would go on to draw national attention, not just for the facts of what happened outside that parking lot, but for the broader questions it raised about intellectual disability, fair representation, and how the justice system evaluates a defendant's capacity to understand the proceedings against them. Advocacy groups and legal scholars pointed to concerns about the adequacy of her defense and questions about her cognitive functioning that, they argued, were never fully addressed at trial. Those appeals worked their way through the courts for over a decade. Despite the concerns raised on her behalf, the courts ultimately allowed the sentence to stand. On the 11th of January, 2001, Wanda Jean Allen was executed by lethal injection, one of the earliest cases in this collection to reach its final legal conclusion, and one that continues to be studied in discussions about capital punishment and disability today. What this case leaves behind isn't just a verdict. It's a reminder of how relationships, when they turn dangerous, rarely give warning signs that are obvious in the moment, and how critical it is for anyone in a volatile relationship to have access to intervention before a conflict becomes irreversible. If you or someone you know is in a relationship that feels unsafe, local domestic violence resources and crisis hotlines exist specifically to help before a situation escalates beyond return. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 3. Lois Nadean Smith. The 4th of July, 1982. Sequoia County District Court. Family loyalty is often described as one of the most powerful forces in human life, the instinct to protect your own child, no matter the cost. But this case forces a harder question. What happens when that instinct isn't tempered by conscience, and a mother's desire to defend her son crosses into something far darker? In the small community of Gans, Oklahoma, 21-year-old Cindy Bailey had once been in a relationship with Lois Nadean Smith's son, Greg. By the time of this case, that relationship had ended, but the fallout from it had not. Whatever tension remained between the two young people, it was Smith, the mother, who ultimately escalated things into something no court could later describe as anything less than a calculated, sustained act of violence. Investigators would later piece together a sequence of events that shocked even seasoned law enforcement in the area. Cindy Bailey was restrained. She suffered prolonged, severe harm at the hands of both Smith and her son together, in a sequence of violence that stretched on before it ultimately claimed her life. The case would go on to be remembered specifically for how deliberate the actions were. This was not a single impulsive act, but a chain of decisions, each one escalating past the point where anyone involved could later claim confusion about what was happening. Greg Smith would face his own legal consequences in connection with the case. But it was Lois Nadean Smith, as the orchestrating adult in the room, who bore the full weight of the state's most serious charge. She was convicted of first-degree murder. Her case moved through Oklahoma's appellate system over the better part of 2 decades, the way so many capital cases do, appeal after appeal, review after review, each one testing whether the original verdict could withstand further scrutiny. It could. On the 4th of December, 2001, Lois Nadean Smith was executed by lethal injection, becoming one of the small number of women in American history and the only handful in Oklahoma's history to face that ultimate legal consequence. What lingers from this case isn't just the crime itself, but the erosion of empathy it represents. A mother who, instead of guiding her son away from conflict, chose to become an active participant in ending a young woman's life over a relationship that had already run its course. Cindy Bailey's family lived the rest of their lives with a loss that no verdict could undo. It's a case frequently cited in discussions about intervention, about how communities and families can recognize when conflict is spiraling toward violence, and the resources available to de-escalate before it's too late. If you or someone you know is caught in an escalating personal conflict that feels like it's heading somewhere dangerous, local mediation services and crisis intervention hotlines exist for exactly this reason, and reaching out early can change the outcome entirely. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 4. Nannie Doss. Crime spanning the 30th of August, 1923, through the 12th of October, 1954. Tulsa County District Court. Every so often, a case comes along that unsettles people not because of a single violent moment, but because of how long it went unnoticed, how many years, how many households, how many unsuspecting families lived alongside a threat they never saw coming. This is one of those cases, and it remains one of the most studied in American criminal history. To the outside world, Nannie Doss was the picture of an unremarkable, cheerful woman, a wife, a mother, later a grandmother, the kind of neighbor who smiled easily and never drew suspicion. Behind that image, over the course of more than 3 decades and across several states, a pattern was quietly forming. One husband after another fell ill and did not recover. Family members close to her, her own mother, her sisters, her children, became swept into that same pattern of sudden, unexplained decline. For years, no one connected the losses. Each death, taken on its own, looked like an unfortunate coincidence, a stomach illness, a sudden collapse, the kind of tragedy families quietly grieved and moved past without deeper questions. It was only in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with the death of her 5th husband, Samuel Doss, that the pattern finally broke into the open. Samuel had survived one health scare already, was released from the hospital seemingly on the mend, and then declined suddenly again. This time, the attending physician did not accept a simple explanation. He ordered an autopsy, and what it revealed, significant levels of arsenic in Samuel's system, changed the entire trajectory of the case. Once investigators began looking closely at Nannie Doss's history, the scope of what they uncovered was almost impossible to comprehend. Confronted with the evidence, she confessed, not just to what happened to Samuel, but to a string of deaths stretching back decades, each one carried out quietly, within her own home, against people who trusted her completely. She would later tell investigators that she had never been searching for financial gain, but for what she called true romance, a chilling explanation that did nothing to soften the scale of what she had done. Oklahoma prosecutors made the decision to center their case solely on Samuel Doss's death, in part because pursuing every case individually would have required exhuming and reinvestigating losses across multiple states and decades. Doss pleaded guilty, in a decision that reflected the era's attitudes as much as the legal reasoning of the time. The state did not pursue the harshest possible sentence against her, and she was instead sentenced to life imprisonment. She spent a decade behind bars before dying of leukemia in 1965 at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. What makes this case endure, generations later, isn't only the number of lives lost, but how long it took for anyone to notice. It's a sobering reminder of why modern forensic pathology and mandatory death investigation protocols exist today, safeguards built, in part, because of cases exactly like this one, where repeated unexplained deaths in a single household went unquestioned for far too long. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 5. Amber Hilberling. The 7th of June, 2011. Tulsa County District Court. Some cases in this series involve years of calculation. Others unfold in the space of a single moment of rage, a moment that can never be taken back, no matter how many years follow it. This is one of the latter, and it remains one of the most talked about cases to come out of Tulsa in the past 2 decades. Amber Hilberling was only 19 years old at the time, 7 months into a pregnancy, married to 23-year-old Josh Hilberling. The couple lived on the 25th floor of a high-rise apartment building in downtown Tulsa, the kind of skyline view most people would call a luxury, but on this night, it became the setting for a tragedy that shocked the entire city. An argument between the two of them escalated inside their apartment. What began as a dispute between a young married couple turned, in a matter of moments, into something far more serious. In the chaos of that argument, Josh went out the window of their 25th floor apartment. He did not survive the fall. What followed was one of the more emotionally complicated trials this state has seen. Prosecutors argued this was no accident, that in the heat of the fight, Amber had pushed him. The defense pointed to her age, to the volatility of the argument itself, to questions about intent in a moment that unfolded in seconds rather than something planned in advance. In 2013, a jury convicted her of second-degree murder, a verdict that reflected the complexity of the case. Not a premeditated killing, but a fatal act of violence carried out in the moment, one the court still found her fully responsible for. She was sentenced to serve her time in an Oklahoma correctional facility. But this case did not end with her sentencing. In 2016, while incarcerated, Amber Hilberling died by suicide, closing the case not with an appeal or a release date, but with another loss layered on top of the first, leaving both families and the wider community to grapple with grief that never found full resolution. This case is frequently cited in conversations about the intersection of youth, mental health, and domestic conflict. How quickly an argument between two very young people, still learning how to navigate a marriage and impending parenthood, can spiral into something neither person could undo. It also underscores the importance of mental health support within the corrections system, where incarcerated individuals often face isolation and psychological strain without adequate intervention. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of self-harm, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available at any hour, free and confidential, for anyone who needs to talk. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 6. Lyndsey Dawn Fiddler. The 4th of November, 2010. Washington County District Court. Not every case in this collection involves a marriage gone wrong or a calculated plan for financial gain. Some of the hardest stories to tell are the ones where addiction, untreated crisis, and a complete failure of a support system converge in a single household, with the smallest, most vulnerable member of that household paying the ultimate price. In Bartlesville, Oklahoma, Lyndsey Dawn Fiddler was a new mother to a 10-day-old daughter named Maggie Mae Trammell. By every account that would later come out in court, Fiddler was in the grip of severe substance dependency at the time, a crisis that had almost certainly gone unaddressed and unsupported in the days surrounding her daughter's birth, a period when new mothers are especially vulnerable and in need of close medical and emotional support. While under the influence of narcotics, Fiddler placed her newborn daughter inside a washing machine in the family home. The infant did not survive. This is, without question, the hardest case in this collection to sit with. There is no version of these facts that isn't devastating, and no framing that changes the reality that an infant lost her life within her first days on Earth. What the court record makes clear is that this was not a premeditated act carried out with intent to harm. The investigation and subsequent legal proceedings centered on the role that severe intoxication played in an act that those closest to the case describe as almost incomprehensible outside the context of addiction at its most consuming. Lyndsey Dawn Fiddler pleaded guilty in 2011 to second-degree manslaughter and child neglect. The case did not proceed as a capital matter. The court's handling of it reflected the distinction between an act of calculated violence and a tragedy rooted in addiction and impaired judgment. This case is one that child welfare advocates and addiction specialists continue to point to when discussing the urgent need for accessible postpartum support, substance abuse treatment, and mandatory wellness checks for new parents showing signs of crisis. No family should ever reach a point like this one without someone having had the chance to intervene. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance use during pregnancy or after childbirth, confidential resources are available through SAMHSA's National Helpline, and local child protective services exist specifically to provide support, not punishment, to families in crisis before a tragedy occurs. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 7. Marilyn K. Plantz. The 13th of August, 1988. Oklahoma County District Court. Some cases in this collection are shaped by rage, by addiction, by a single fractured moment. This one was shaped by neither. It was shaped by planning, by a woman who looked at her marriage not as something to leave, but as something to convert into a payout, and who recruited others to help her carry that plan through to its end. Marilyn K. Plantz was married to James Plantz, and the two lived in Midwest City, Oklahoma. Behind the surface of that marriage, Marilyn had taken out a life insurance policy on her husband worth $300,000, a policy that, on its own, meant nothing, until it became the motive investigators say drove everything that followed. Rather than act alone, Marilyn brought in her teenaged lover, William Clifford Bryson, along with one of his friends. Together, according to the case built by prosecutors, the men carried out a brutal, sustained attack against James inside the family home, using baseball bats. What happened afterward was, if anything, even more calculated. James's body was placed inside his own pickup truck, and the vehicle was set on fire, an act investigators would later argue was intended not just to end his life, but to destroy evidence and stage the scene as something other than what it was. The plan did not hold up under investigation. Detectives traced the insurance policy, the relationship between Marilyn and Bryson, and the physical evidence at the scene back to a coordinated conspiracy rather than an accidental fire. Marilyn K. Plantz was tried and convicted for her role in orchestrating her husband's death for financial gain. She was sentenced to death. Her case moved through Oklahoma's appellate courts over more than a decade, testing the same legal questions so many capital cases eventually face. Questions about her culpability compared to the men who physically carried out the attack. Questions about the fairness of her original trial. Ultimately, none of those appeals succeeded in overturning her sentence. On the 1st of May, 2001, Marilyn K. Plantz was executed by lethal injection. What sets this case apart in the public memory is the calculation behind it. The fact that this wasn't a marriage that ended in a moment of chaos, but one that was, according to the court's findings, deliberately ended for money, using people young enough to still be shaped by poor influence and drawn into violence they might never have otherwise chosen. It's a case that continues to be cited in discussions about financial abuse within relationships and the manipulation of young people into serious crimes by older partners who exploit trust and inexperience for their own ends. If you suspect someone you know is being manipulated or coerced into dangerous behavior within a relationship, community outreach programs and local victim advocacy centers can offer confidential guidance before a situation turns irreversible. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 8. Sandra Camille Bridewell. Primary investigation dated the 7th of December, 1985. Oklahoma County District Court. This next case is different from the others in this collection, and it's worth being upfront about that difference before we go any further. This is a story about suspicion, about pattern, and about a woman investigators spent years pursuing, but it is not a story with a murder conviction at its center. That distinction matters, and we want to be precise about it. Sandra Bridewell became known in the media as the Black Widow of Highland Park, a nickname that followed her through decades of scrutiny tied to the deaths of 3 husbands and a close friend, deaths that investigators across multiple jurisdictions found difficult to explain away as simple misfortune. The most scrutinized of these was the death of her 3rd husband, Alan Rarick, who was found shot inside his car in Oklahoma City in December of 1985. Detectives built a circumstantial case around Bridewell in the years that followed, patterns of behavior, financial motives, inconsistencies in her account of events, enough to make her the primary person of interest in Rarick's case for years. But circumstantial suspicion, however persistent, is not the same as proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and no prosecutor was ever able to secure a homicide conviction against her. To this day, Alan Rarick's case remains formally unsolved, and Sandra Bridewell has never been convicted of causing his death or anyone else's. What she was convicted of, in 2008, was a federal case entirely separate from any of the deaths connected to her name, identity theft, and fraud, charges that came from financial deception unrelated to the earlier investigations. That conviction is the one clear, documented legal outcome tied to her name. This case endures in true crime discussion precisely because of that unresolved tension. It raises a question that applies far beyond Sandra Bridewell herself. What happens to a person's life and their public reputation when suspicion outpaces the evidence needed to prove guilt in a court of law? It's a case frequently referenced by legal scholars discussing the limits of circumstantial evidence and the importance of the presumption of innocence, even in the court of public opinion, even when a case captures the public imagination the way this one has. For families of victims whose cases remain officially unsolved, cold case units across Oklahoma continue to accept new tips, and organizations supporting the families of unsolved homicide victims offer both advocacy and long-term emotional support while a case remains open. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 9. Toni Elizabeth Torres. The 9th of August, 2003. Ottawa County District Court. This next case sits among the most difficult in this entire collection, not because of calculation or greed, but because of how completely a mental health crisis, left unrecognized, can alter the course of a family forever. We tell it here not for shock, but because it remains one of the clearest examples in Oklahoma's legal history of how the courts weigh criminal responsibility against severe, documented mental illness. Near Miami, Oklahoma, Toni Elizabeth Torres was the mother of a 17-month-old son named Alex. Along the Spring River, in a moment that would come to define the rest of her life and the grief of everyone who knew her son, Alex did not survive. In the immediate aftermath, Toni told investigators it had been a terrible accident. But as the investigation continued, her account changed. She confessed that what happened had not been accidental at all, that in a state investigators and clinicians would later connect to a severe, undiagnosed mental health crisis. She described hearing something compelling her toward an act she could not later fully explain or reconcile with who she was outside of that moment. The case moved through Ottawa County's court system not as a straightforward homicide prosecution, but as a case fundamentally shaped by psychiatric evaluation. In late 2004, following extensive psychiatric review, a judge made the determination that Toni Elizabeth Torres was legally insane at the time of the incident, connected to severe, documented bipolar disorder. Rather than a criminal sentence, she was committed to a secure state psychiatric facility. The legal system's acknowledgement that this was, first and foremost, a mental health catastrophe rather than a calculated crime. This case remains one of the most frequently cited in Oklahoma when discussing postpartum mental health, the danger of unmanaged severe psychiatric illness, and the tragic gaps that can exist between a family in visible crisis and the intervention that might have changed everything. It underscores why perinatal mental health screening has become such an urgent priority in maternal health care in the years since. If you or someone you know is a parent experiencing symptoms of severe mental health crisis, hearing things that others don't, or thoughts that feel disconnected from reality, please know this is a medical emergency deserving of immediate care, not judgment, and resources through the Postpartum Support International Helpline and local crisis intervention teams exist specifically to help families before a tragedy occurs. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 10. Chloe Marie Thomas. The 16th of April, 2014. Oklahoma County District Court. We close this collection with a case that speaks to one of the most painful realities in modern true crime. How a phone, a lure, and a moment of trust can be weaponized by people the victim never had reason to suspect. In Edmond, Oklahoma, 16-year-old and Josette Hill was, by every account, an ordinary teenager living an ordinary life. The kind of life that makes what happened to her feel so senseless in retrospect. Chloe Marie Thomas, working alongside a teenaged accomplice, used a phone to reach out to Hill and lure her to an apartment under false pretenses. What awaited her there was not a social gathering, but a robbery scheme aimed at securing money for drugs. In the course of that robbery attempt, Thomas and her accomplice strangled Hill, and she did not survive. Afterward, in an attempt to conceal what had happened, they buried her body in a remote wooded area, a decision that would ultimately fail to protect either of them from investigators who worked to piece together Hill's final hours and bring her killers to account. The case that followed drew significant attention in Oklahoma County, both for the calculated nature of the plan and for how young everyone involved was. A victim in the earliest years of her adult life, and offenders barely older, whose choices that day would define the rest of their futures. Chloe Marie Thomas was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison in December of 2016. And Josette Hill's case remains one that community advocates in Edmond point to when discussing online and phone-based predation of teenagers, and the importance of teaching young people to recognize manipulation tactics before trust is exploited. Her story is also frequently cited by organizations working to divert young people away from drug-related crime before it escalates into violence. If you're a parent or guardian concerned about a teenager's online communications or new relationships that feel unclear or unsafe, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children offers confidential guidance and resources for families navigating exactly this kind of concern before it's too late to intervene. And Josette Hill's life, like every life lost in the 10 cases we've covered today, was not just a case file or a headline. It was a full future that ended too soon, and every family left behind by these 10 cases carries a grief that a courtroom outcome, however just, can never fully repay. If today's stories affected you, that's the point. Not to entertain, but to remember, to honor, and to keep asking how we build a safer future for the families still living with these losses. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we close out this episode, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another gripping true crime documentary. If you're enjoying the stories we bring you, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and we'll see you in the next case file. 10 cases, 10 women, 10 very different paths that led each of them into Oklahoma's courtrooms, some ending in execution, some in life behind bars, one in a psychiatric facility, and one that never reached a conviction at all. What ties them together isn't a single motive or a single kind of crime. It's what they leave behind. Families who buried people they loved far too soon. Communities that had to rebuild trust in the people closest to them. And a justice system that spent years, sometimes decades, working to separate fact from fabrication. We told these stories not to sensationalize what happened, but to remember the people at the center of them. The husbands, the children, the friends, the young woman lured by a phone call she never should have answered. Every verdict in this episode, whatever the outcome, represents years of investigative work by people committed to finding the truth, even when the truth took a long time to surface. If anything in today's episode struck close to home, a relationship that doesn't feel safe, a family member showing signs of a mental health crisis, a young person you're worried might be manipulated by someone they trust, please don't wait to reach out. Local crisis lines, family justice centers, and organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children exist specifically to help before a situation becomes irreversible. Asking for help early is never a small thing. Thank you for spending this time with us and with these stories. If Cold Case Hour has helped you understand a part of Oklahoma's history you didn't know before, that's exactly why we do this. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next case file. Drop a comment with which case stayed with you the most, and give this video a like if you'd like to see more deep dives like this one. We'll see you next time.